It's old and deteriorated and needs quite a bunch of, yes, a hole is a pretty good description. As you can see, this picture sort of depicts some of the problems that we've run into. You can see the dilapidated lockers, you can see the low-hanging pipes, the deteriorated floor, and the rest of the facility. On October 30th, 2007, we entered into a contract with Paul Poirier and Michael David Architects for what turned out to be really two-phase design services. The first phase was an analysis, and that analysis was of the mechanical and the electrical systems. The purpose of that analysis was to really review and to make sure that the improvements we put in would not compromise the existing HVAC system to the rest of the building, and we were very concerned with that. The phase two, of course, was the final design, getting a final estimate, and construction phasing. The analysis indicated that there are 10 separate HVAC systems serving the building. Those 10 separate systems actually compromises the original system by taking away the need for it and what's called chilling out or freezing out the main boiler chiller. The main system is oversized for what we have. It's very old, it's in poor condition, and it's really inefficient. The report did indicate, though, that we could use the existing system with slightly better circulation. But no additional unit was possible because that would just freeze out or shut down that original system. The analysis also looked at the electrical system in the police station. It told us that the main switchboard, the transformer, and the distribution panel were just obsolete. Replacement parts were unavailable, and age and the impedance has created inefficiencies. There's also no backup power to any of the locker room area in case of an emergency. The analysis also provided 3 project options for us to go forward with it. That was the upgrade of the locker room and the exercise room at about $1.5 million, the upgrade of the locker room and the exercise room, and then we added an emergency generator to provide power down there. That was about $2 million. And then the complete package, which was the upgrade of the locker and the exercise rooms, we added the generator. We wanted to do a number of electrical upgrades and a new HVAC system for the entire building, and that at that time was estimated at $5.3 million. On June 24th, Council went ahead and directed staff to go ahead and design option 3, which was the inclusive option, and added the women's locker room to make sure that we had a sufficient electrical system to the women's lockers. We were also asked to include solar power, and then to return to Council with a revised estimate after the state had passed the budget, and trying to note what the state would do to the RDA budget. At 90% plans and specification, we are at $8 million, quite a bit higher than what our original estimate was. The construction cost is $5.8 million, almost $5.9 million, and then everything sort of goes from there. I'd also like you to take a look at the relocation during construction, which is $650,000. So let's get into why we're at the $8 million mark at this point. We added the women's locker room, of course, and that's going to add money. But when we were in the roof looking at the HVAC ducting, it turns out that all the ducting on the inside, the sound insulation, has been deteriorating, and you see black bits of dust come down. And that's requiring the replacement of the ducting system. If the ducting system needs to be replaced, we get into the ceiling, which requires asbestos and lead abatement removal. And then if we're into the ceiling with the asbestos and lead removal and replacing the ducting, we're going to need to relocate all the building occupants during construction.
John, there's a question here.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, John. I don't mean to interrupt, but going back one notion before we get into the details of the specifics of some of the changes. When you were going through the various different options, the upgrade of the men's locker room, the exercise room, blah, at 1.6, blah, 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 the total package being 5.3, you go to the slide, the next slide, which had the graph. Yeah. And the 5.3 for the total package, the construction estimate in this graph is 5.8. So that's a little bit of an increase. Tony, can't you hear me? Now, in your description of the total package at 5.3, did that include these other items that you have in the graph, the design, the 10%, the construction management, the relocation, and so forth, in the $5.3 million figure?
Yes, it did include that in the $5.3 million figure.
It did.
However, we ran into the ducting that was an issue, and that ballooned into a number of other things that made the construction estimate go higher.
Okay, so everything in this graph was originally placed in the 5.3, and now we have it at $8
Yes.
million dollars. Okay, I just wanted to make that very clear for myself going forward. Thanks.
Those are the reasons why it went to the $8 million is the additional. So, in a quick summary, we're at 90% complete plans and specification. Our estimate has increased to $8 million. The state has taken away from the RDA funds $1.4 million, which you know about, and we'll be discussing at a later meeting. And the project is requiring the replacement of the ducting and the relocation of the PD personnel during construction. So our recommendation at this point is to consider deferring construction of the new HVAC system and constructing the most critical elements. And those would include the men's and women's locker rooms, a new generator, electrical upgrades to the complete basement area, and that project cost would come in at about $3.2 million, and that's total project cost.
Can we have a question here, John?
Thank you. When you say relocation of all personnel, are you saying that the police station itself will have to, the operations will have to move as well? I mean, who's left if you're saying all building occupants?
Well, what we had planned out was to have the front counter area and police right there to be put in trailers at the police station itself. The dispatch would then have its own trailer also. We would relocate the rest of the personnel either in their existing building or rent space that's available.
And then in terms of the general public going into needing services or getting questions answered, tickets paid, that happens through the trailers?
That would be happening.
And then investigations when the police need to investigate, they have, the storage area and
the records,
interrogation rooms,
evidence,
that kind of thing.
Evidence would also be in a trailer, but office personnel would then be, or personnel needing office space would probably be in a rented or leased area.
And the $650,000 cost for that is for how long a period of time?
9 months.
9 months. Thank you.
I have a question. Lately, the bids have been coming in lower than anticipated because of the economy. Did that not happen here?
Well, we haven't gotten bids yet on the project. This is just an estimate, and it's at the 90% phase of the project. So whether they come in, low or high is yet to be seen. I would imagine that there's already been some consideration for construction. The market tends to adjust. So when we got the bids for the fire station, there was a lot of people out there with companies with people available. Right now, they've probably downsized a little bit, but they would upsize again for something like this. Right now, we're trying to take that in consideration with our estimates, but the fire is also going to keep some people busy. So my answer is that it's an estimate, and that's what it is, just an estimate.
Okay, Ms. O'Connor?
Yeah. John, could you explain in a little more detail, or maybe a lot more detail, the HVAC function and why it had this sort of ripple effect through the costs here. It's relatively complicated. It's a system that goes, not just in the basement. This is a system for the entire building that does more than you would think. So could you break this down for us a bit, please?
Yeah. And I'm going to try and speculate on some of the history that happened with the HVAC system. Originally, there was a one boiler chiller type of a system, and that means it actually heats the air and it actually cools the air and then mixes this air and distributes it. It was supposed to distribute it throughout the area and throughout the building. The basement was, I don't think, included in the original building, but may have been. Over the years, as we have added people and we have added the dispatch center and we've added all sorts of things to there, we've added systems to take care of those separate areas. That's a really inefficient way to do it and to heat it. So when we did the original estimate, we figured on taking those systems, using the original ducting system, and going in and not disturbing too much in the other areas and using the original ducting system. When we got into the ducting system, there's a sound insulation that's in the ducting system. That's this black material that makes the sound much easier when you're in your office. You can sometimes see black around vents, things like that. That's some of it deteriorating down. Well, this is in pretty bad shape right now, and if we were to put in a new system on top, now that black stuff would be disturbed even more and end up coming out on the desks and making more of an issue than what we have now. So that meant the replacement of that HVAC ducting. Well, to get up to that ducting, we needed to get into the ceiling. And in the ceiling and in the plaster, there's a lot of asbestos and there's quite a bit of lead, which means that we can't have personnel in that area when we're abating the asbestos and the lead, so that we would have to take that and relocate that personnel. So that's where you get the compounding effects. We also ran into some trouble with, not trouble, but some code requirements of adjacent rooms that needed to be 2-hour fire separations, some issues like that. We have also looked at, well, we're going to move everybody out, so let's see if we can look at this building and reconfigure everything and do it right and see if we can get it out of it. What we determined is that there's just not enough space. And then once you started doing that, you'd end up with all of the ADA requirements of an exiting for everything else. And so it just kept compounding and compounding and compounding. And, as much as I'd love to do a complete remodel of this building, I'd almost rather do a complete demolition of the building.
Exactly.
And then go forward. So that's where we got most of the costs that were incurred.
Right, okay. This is a stellar argument for why we really do need a brand new building for our police department to operate out of. With the new HVAC system, you just said that the current melange, conglomeration, whatever you want to call it, hodgepodge of systems that exist today are very inefficient. Have you looked at all at how much energy a new, highly energy efficient cooling and heating system for the building would be? I mean, I know that you've got these costs in here, but talk to me in terms of percentage of saved energy.
We did look at that, and our preliminary calculations show that we would probably save about 40% of the energy in that building.
40%? With
the electrical and with the HVAC system.
And
that amounts to about $30,000 though a year. It's a year, a month. I think it's a year. So it's going to take a long time for us to pay that back. I have the
So
figures.
it won't amortize as quickly as one would like, but a 40% reduction in the carbon footprint of this particular facility is not something to discount I mean, that's got value in and of itself, especially if we're trying to work toward some sort of carbon neutrality in some time frame of some reality.
One of our considerations of going forward with how we're with at least our recommendations from Public Works point of view is that we would displace the police department for this 9-month period, and they would move back in, and they would only see the locker rooms having been done. When we can do it, because they wouldn't really see the air conditioning, they wouldn't really see the electrical.
They'd feel it.
They might. They would feel it. But the idea of doing a project and displacement for that long, and then only having, air conditioning to come back and only one small locker room, we didn't feel that was a big bang for the buck. To be quite honest with you.
Another question over here, John.
No, I was just going to suggest that maybe we should actually hear from the people who have to live inside the building on a daily basis.
That might.
Ms. Schneider.
Thank you. And if there are comments from the occupants of that building, I see some police officers here. That's fine with me as well. I know in the past when it looked at space issues in the building, the roof was looked at as something to, if there was even a possibility to add room on the roof set back so you don't see it from the street, all that, important design concerns. Has that even been looked at as, like, maybe just move the locker space up top with the new floor and then you wouldn't have to deal with all the... or do the other electrical and HVAC system and things apply even if you added that space up there? Or I guess the question is, has that even been looked at as an option?
I believe that was looked at as an option a number of years ago, and it was possible to do that. This project started out as a locker room, men's
Right.
locker room.
It's sort of it's mushroomed.
Part of my job is to try and keep these on track and try and do the best we can within our scope. So,
But if that was looked at again, would all the issues related to the HVAC system and the electricity and all that, because you'd be adding more square footage, indoor square footage, and the needs of the upgrades to the locker rooms in terms of charging devices and so forth, would all those things trigger anyway?
a majority of those things would trigger, but remember, you still have, a dilapidated HVAC system.
Right.
And then most of your HVAC system is located on the roof anyway.
Right.
So you'd be
Okay.
relocating it.
Okay, just to make that clear. Thank you.
I'm a bit unclear as to what the recommendation would entail. When would we start? You're talking about deferring part of the project. When would we start the project?
What we're recommending at this juncture is revising the plans to include, those critical elements, basically the lower floor of the police station, excluding the firing range, and the women's locker room, and not doing the HVAC system at a cost of about $3.2 million.
The thing that I find troubling about that would be that all of the trauma of displacing everybody and then not really doing anything, and not doing what we really want to do. Is there some expectation that by deferring it we're going to find more money? Because I think that's probably not a good expectation. Or are we deferring because we think we'll have clearer information in a few months? You see what I mean? I'm trying to see what's the cost benefit of not trying to find the money, not going to some other form of financing to do the whole project. Why would we displace the entire PD twice? Can somebody help clarify that for me?
Well, we would not displace the entire PD and the facility with only doing the basement and only doing the limited project, the $3.2 million project. We would displace everyone if we did the entire project, meaning the HVAC system. So if that was one of the reasons.
So there's no displacement if we just do the minor, the
there'll
smaller
be
project.
minimal displacement for the minor project.
Okay, and then what is it we expect to learn in a few months?
We won't be learning anything. I think we've learned what we've learned. We have a dilapidated system. I think it's a question of if council wants to spend $8 million on that project
Well,
and on that building.
I think maybe we're getting into a Jim Armstrong area here. What I'm trying to find is, are we deferring while we do a more thorough capital assessment of the needs of the city, and we prioritize the needs of Parks and Rec and Library and PD, or are we just deferring PD? In other words, how does this fit into the overall capital planning for the city? We just completed a task force report on capital planning for the city, so I'm just interested in knowing how that fits into this.
I think the first thing is I think really what our recommendation is we first believe that the council should look, or should look at this in the context of the entire RDA capital budget, which we're planning to bring to council or the agency. Yeah, and I think you need to look at it in that context, especially if you're leaning towards the $8 million solution, because the $8 million solution is going to use up a good portion of all your RDA funds, and I think you need to make that decision and looking at the other priorities that you've already established and the needs you have. Clearly, if we only do the $3 million fix, at some point in the future, we're going to have to come back and either look at the entire building and possibly rebuild it, or come back and do the HVAC fix. What we're really saying is that if we want to move forward on the locker room, we can muddle through for a few more years until we come up with a more broad solution. But the problem with relocating everybody out of there, for $8 million, and then still really not dealing with the broader issue. We just felt we're really not certain that's the way to go. We should really look at the total square footage needs, because we still have inadequate space for the number of police personnel we have. We've got lease space next door, and
I think that's probably a wise decision to make sure we understand the total RDA needs. But then that draws me to the general fund needs as well, because the RDA funds are applicable to projects that are in the RDA, but then there are other projects in the RDA that maybe are applicable for general funds. So don't we need to look at the entire capital picture of the city rather than just the RDA capital?
yes, you really should look at it comprehensively.
Okay. I know what I think. Committee?
Does anybody from the police department want to weigh in here? Evidently not. All right. Well, yeah, you have to get to the microphone, Ed, if you come. Captain Zeiler. You don't have to, So. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
You on?
Green's
Okay.
on. I'm just going to start off by saying, first off, I really appreciate the effort that the city's put into it. It's been a recognized problem. I mean, John Shoof and his whole crew have done a really good job looking into this issue and problem, and I also recognize that money is what it is right now. Redevelopment money's been reduced. I understand that. One of our engineers at one of our meetings kind of likened this whole project of when we were kids playing pixie sticks. You pull one pixie sticks out and 2 or 3 more fall. That's basically what's happened. The one thing, I realize that probably everybody agrees that this is something that needs to be done, but okay, where are we going to come up with $8 million? The one thing the one recommendation that John did make, as far as the police personnel are concerned, the locker rooms, the weight room downstairs, the showers, the efficiency, a lot of the work that needs to be done down there, even with a $3.2 million project, that whole floor will still only have certain areas that have conditioned air. The locker rooms, the weight room will not have any recirculated air. It'll have maybe recirculated, but it won't be cooled air, it won't be heated air. And you've been down there and you've seen what it's like down there. So that's one argument on the HVAC end of it. One thing that we did find is that when we were looking into the electrical and the engineering and the black dust, I think that our asbestos companies determined that that's not asbestos. But if you've been up there, you've seen what it's done to our venting. You see what it does to the desk. You see what it does to the general workspace. The one thing that we did find is that when we were looking into the electrical and the engineering and the black dust, I think that our asbestos companies determined that that's not asbestos. But if you've been up there, you've seen what it's done to our venting. You see what it does to the desk. You see what it does to the general even when we did the locker remodel, and this is what one of the things I would represent, is that even when we did the locker remodel, as small of a job as that was structurally to the building, we didn't take down any walls, we didn't take down any plumbing, we basically worked within, fixed, suspended ceilings and driving nails into the fixture. It still was to the point where it was pretty unbearable to work in that building based on the fact that it's a cement building and the noise. The project that you're going to deal with on the third floor is going to take all of the piping that you've seen when we walked you through the locker room, all those 6-inch sewer lines, and all that's going to go underground, and there's some structural things that have to be done in the back for ADA on that back door entrance, the column. Mm-hmm. The amount of noise in that building is going to make the structure very difficult, to be in a working environment. So when we worked it out, the $650,000 represented, renting some extra buildings, but with the use of the annex, even if we were to do this project, we're going to have the whole bottom floor empty. And some of the third floor staff that have some of the things that they have to do on a day-to-day basis, if you tried to sit in that third floor and conduct business while they're downstairs jackhammering everything else, maybe it wouldn't be a 9-month relocation, but I would think the staff would want to come out of that third floor and maybe move over to the annex or something. So I think the only thing that I, again, would reiterate that I'm really glad that the city spent the time to really come in there and did. I mean, John and his group has done an excellent job, assessing what the issues are in there. But if we are going to do with that, my only point would be if we are going to do with a $3.2 million and you're still not going to have conditioned air on that bottom floor and you're still going to have issues with, I think it's 14 redundant airing systems throughout, and you're still going to have the black stuff coming out in the building, we've worked together as a group trying to figure out where can we, you almost have to make that, it's not the 1.5 to 3.2, it's like 3.2 up to the 8. Because it all triggers the electrical, it triggers the HVAC, it triggers the asbestos, the lead,
Nothing
the
in
whole
between.
thing, and that's what really makes it difficult decision to make. But on behalf of the employees in there, we've been through relocation. It would be a difficult time to be relocated for 9 months, but the appreciation to come back to a conditioned air building that's with power that's sufficient, with a new generator, so that we can run that building, like we have, we were lucky that the last fire we didn't have power issues, but if we did, the current setup, doesn't have that ability to run power to that whole building right now. So the generator will take care of that, but the system, the air system, is something that I think, and we need to get rid of that black asbestos dust and all that lining that's coming out throughout that
Did
building.
I just hear you say that if in this T fire, the area that the police building is located in had gone black and had gone black for a substantial amount of time, you do not have the ability to get generated power?
We have a generator that's only got a certain section. Maybe John can address how much of that but our new generator he's talking about will give 72-hour full power to the entire building at the current levels that we have. But right now the generator, we have it down to where there's certain key elements, like all your briefings you're having up on the third floor, there would be no generator power to that third floor as we currently exist without replacing that generator.
So,
But you're
Captain,
okay for emergency operations?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Councilmember Falcone?
Yeah.
There's actually 2 small generators that go right now in the PD, and we would propose to, with either project, we would propose to put one larger generator to run almost the entire building. Right now what they have is no power in their locker room and their areas, to charge up their equipment, and it'd be completely dark in there. The Murphy room, though, is on emergency generators, so is the 911 center. So it's functional, but it is not optimal.
So let me ask this question then, and you may or may not. This is going to be just sort of a knee-jerk response. In this last fire, if you had been without power and having to rely on the 2 generators that you have, everybody agrees that everybody did a very good job during this last disaster, that we just dodged this really dangerous bullet. How much would your operations have been compromised if you had to operate under those conditions versus the fact that you didn't lose power? Now, you can say somewhat, you can say a lot, you can say severely.
Well, I can only say as it relates to the power, the locker rooms, as the as the Emergency Operations Center was working, you would not see it in that particular center. Peripherally, the locker rooms, the third floor where they did the briefings, some of the second floor would not have power. But other than that, the general, dispatch center, the battery, the network system, the operations center, that continued. But it's the other peripheral portions of they're not set up on emergency power, just based on what the kilowatt load is on those two generators that John talked about.
Deputy Chief Klaus, I see you standing here, assuming you want to say something.
I would, thank you. I just want to clarify one thing. We actually did lose power at the beginning
you did?
stages of the fire. And just for a brief moment, the entire building was black. Our existing generators did
Just for a moment.
pop on, and a lot of the city was dark for quite some time in the initial stages of that. We were able to function in the EOC and the critical parts of the building as we needed to during that event. So it popped on, it worked as planned, but we have it in the critical parts of the building. So in those emergencies, if it works like it did in the T fire, we will be okay in the interim. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, John, do you have further comments? Are you looking for?
I might add, though, that the generators do not power the HVAC systems except for the dispatch center. So
there's
it
no
could
air
get
moving.
It could get uncomfortable.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong, again, I still have some questions. I think the staff report suggests we postpone until we have a look at the entire RDA capital program. I'm really concerned with the capital program for the city, and the RDA is a subsection of that from my perspective. So, because I know that we can interchange funds between RDA and general fund as we need to. So, what's the timing for us having a chance to look at the entire capital needs?
We're going to provide the 6-year capital improvement program to you, I think, right after the first of the year. Is that correct, Mr. McTomney? And, of course, what makes it more complicated is with the current economic situation going on, the funding that will be available on the general fund side is, one of the contingencies we're looking at right now is, do we need to cut general fund capital this year or next year? So I think, the more you can look at this in the context of other projects, both in the RDA and also in the general fund, I think it's better policy making, because then it allows you to prioritize things. I think what we're trying to do is be responsive to the prior directions we received from this group and from the council to design this project. And at that time, it was a $5 million project that's now gone up to $8 million, and report back to you. But I think we're concerned that the price continues to go up, and it's going to affect, even if you're just looking at the RDA budget, it's going to affect it pretty dramatically.
Well, the impression that at least I'm getting is one of the committee members is that the $3 million project really doesn't get us enough there to me to be worthy of consideration. I would rather get a general picture of what the entire city's critical needs are, and I think the budget crisis that we're getting into makes it even more important that we make sure we know what is needed in all of the aspects of the city. And I hate to see all this work done in the PD and then not do what's really needed there. And I would rather try to find the money to do the whole project after we know what the whole city looks like. I mean, that's just me talking here, and I need to hear from the rest of the committee.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that doing this in an understandably sort of parsed out way makes sense. I'm not discounting that is one way to go and a legitimate way to go. It's just not the way I want to go. So the task force, it's been well known, well documented for decades that this building is woefully insufficient on so many levels. The task force recognized this, the capital task force recognized clearly that this is, in terms of capital, the top priority in the city. And I think that having the facility for the operations of one of our most important functions as we just saw this last week, how absolutely critical, the public safety departments are, I don't see a higher priority. There are wish lists on the RDA capital program. There are a lot of wonderful programs and services and things that we do in the city. But if that fire had marched down Sycamore Drainage and ended up at East Beach, we don't have a city. So let's put our priorities in place. $8 million is a lot of money, no doubt. But we're not going to be building a new building anytime soon. So the reality of the situation is we need to move forward in the best way that we can, and having a complete, well thought out, well designed project, I think, is the best thing to do here. I'm wondering, I don't see how waiting really gets us anything new that we don't know. The budget is in terrible shape. The state is beyond dysfunctional. It's not pretty out there at all. It's not going to get prettier. We know that. I mean, what more do we need to know? So I'm all for looking at the RDA capital projects. I'm all for looking at the capital in the general fund as a whole, so we can see really where this fits and what we'll have to give, and some things we'll have to give. The plaza comes to mind. No. Well, yes. But I'm wondering if we can move forward. And as you said, you're 90% complete in design. We don't have bids yet. There are steps between here and there that need to be done. And that can be done. There can be progress made moving forward. And then we get these updates for the capital projects, and then we can sort of we don't have to make the final decision today. What we do need to do, I think, and which I'm advocating for, is that we continue to move forward in a positive way, that we continue with the complete project as though we're going to find the $8 million, which may turn into 6.8 or something, who knows, based on economics. So I really do think that, and we put almost $7 million into the fire station. Hello. I mean, let's do what we need to do in order to keep the city safe. Beautiful, yes, is wonderful, but there has to be a city to keep beautiful. Thank you.
So, Mr. Armstrong, what can be done to keep the project moving forward without dropping the final hammer here?
Committee members, we can go ahead and move forward and finish the plans and specifications, which we could wrap up in the next 3 weeks, and get a big package ready to go out to bid. We could even possibly go out to bid with a statement saying that the funds hasn't been found, but we're looking for those. We can go as far as you like, except for award, of course, until you have the money. So we're actually prepared, and I think I'd recommend finishing the plans because you always have those plans finished.
Ms. Snyder?
Thank you. First, another question came up during this past conversation. I was at the EOC when the power went out and generator went up like that, and it worked fine. And actually, during the weekend, it was much cooler in there than outside with all the smoky air. So that was good to see and witness firsthand. But it did occur to me that if we went through this during the relocation 9-month period, considering that the EOC is located in the police basement, where would the EOC be temporarily? I know eventually we're looking at the fire station, but that's not done yet. Is the proposal then to wait until the fire station's completed before we would start this project, if we are going to do this project? Can you tell me what the timing of that? Because we need a place for an EOC at all times, right?
Mr. Armstrong?
Well, we also have a backup EOC at the airport, unless we have a flood.
Well, okay. I don't know if I like that answer, but okay. All right. So that could be
And I
a
think
9-month backup.
in timing, our plan is to bring the RDA capital budget to you next week.
Okay.
And so I think in terms of
On the 9th, you mean?
Excuse me, or is it?
December
is it
9th?
the 9th? Okay, I'm sorry, the report.
Couple of weeks,
Yeah,
few
a
weeks.
couple of weeks. And so it's
3 weeks.
You're really if you want to see it in that context, to me, that would be the time to do
Okay.
it. It's not like it's going to be months away, at
Okay.
least looking at the RDA budget.
Okay.
And we would still have to go to the full council to get direction to go forward anyway, so.
Correct. Great. I mean, we do need to look at it in full context, absolutely. Hearing the comments I'm hearing, what I'm hearing is $8 million really still doesn't even get us to where we ultimately want to be. And $3 million, it's only $3.2 million, but it's $3.2 million, and that even is not even adequate in terms of the living conditions in the room. I mean, frankly, I think we need a new police headquarters, period. And whether that means we knew that 10 years ago. That's why the city put out a bond measure to the voters. Unfortunately, the voters didn't vote it in. Maybe this is probably not the best time to do that again. But I think before we just move forward and let's spend $8 million on something that is not fully adequate for everything that station needs, if that's our top priority, which it should be and it is, then I think we need to really look at what is it that the city needs in terms of a police headquarters. And if that means a new building, if that means a completely, something that meets all the needs of the police department and our public safety, then we have to look at that as opposed to just saying, let's just spend $8.3 million that will get some new locker rooms and a new HVAC system, but not really satisfy all the needs of the building that we currently have. So at the same time, I agree, waiting years and years and years to even, to do any improvements is very difficult. And I know the people who work in that building have basically suffered in that area for a very long time. And I don't think it's fair for them to wait much longer. So what I would suggest is that we hear the full RDA capital picture on the 9th. You're already 90% complete with the plans. Finish that so we have that completed. We have that as an option. That might be the way we need to go, but we need to look also at the context and then also look at what if we could find another location and actually have a new headquarters. Is that even an option? And how would we finance it? Because if what we're saying is true, like I said, if the infrastructure task force and we agreed with them saying that this is the top priority in terms of capital needs, then let's really look at what's needed as the department as a whole. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, I'm hearing consensus that we're not happy with the reduced project. It seems like we all three would prefer to see the entire RDA project, and then at the same time, our budget, and at the same time, we'd like to know if staff can move forward with getting at least a bid document ready. And is that something, John, that your staff would be doing anyway, or are you waiting for us to ask that you do that?
Well, actually, we're not waiting. We're already going forward because to pull off a designer right now, we wouldn't get them back for another 3 months. So we'll finish out the 90% plan, or we'll finish out those plans. I do need to tell you, though, if we come back with the $3.2 million, we would have to make modifications to the plans and the specifications, and it would be at additional cost, but it would be minor compared to the project.
Sure. Okay, so what direction do you need from us then today, Mr. Armstrong?
I think what I'm hearing is that you're going to defer this until you see the RDA budget, but I think what I'm hearing, and I want to make sure, is that there's appears to be consensus that at least at this point your preference is to do the $8 million project. But at least I heard the chair summarize it that way. I'm not sure I hear complete consensus.
Yeah, I guess my question is on the $8 million project, is that really going to give us what we need as a whole for the police department and for the headquarters? And if the answer to that is no, then, and are there other options of yes, more than $8 million, but really get us to where we need to be in the long run? I think we need to look at that.
Let me, explain to you, some of my thought process over the last few years, because, as you know, we did about a $750,000 improvement to the records area a couple of years ago in a new ADA restroom in the front. And when I thought this was a $1 million remodel of the locker room, to me, that was going to hold us over until we could get to the bigger issue, which is really either a new building or it's to look at a third floor and continue to lease space in the building next door, but to add square footage, because the current square footage is clearly inadequate. Where I think we have pause is if we're going to spend $8 million to basically stay in a holding pattern. That's a lot of money to stay in a holding pattern, and I think to me, the real, and we're waiting for the infrastructure task force report, but I think even in talking with them, they concluded that even if you were able to get that 10% of the general fund towards capital, that wouldn't be for this project. You still probably need to do some type of bond issue, and that's $4 or $5 million away at best. If you think of, even if we had voter approval, then we'd have to get a site, we'd have to design it, go through all of the discretionary review processes. And so I think for me, what's been hard is if it's a couple $1 million to hold you over for 5 years in the scheme of this, that's not that bad. Just like, to me, it was okay spending the $750 on the lobby remodel. When you're up to $8 million to hold you over, then I start to take pause and go, wait, do we really want to do that? Because now we're talking about a lot of money, and we really still haven't dealt, just as you said, with the bigger issue, and that is either a new building or a substantially different building.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Falcone.
Just don't have any. Given the bond measure, now there were complications back then, and it didn't have to do exactly with whether or not people wanted a police building. There's a lot of politics involved, and so that didn't work. There have been numerous attempts over the years since, and a number since you've been here, Mr. Armstrong, as well, that have tried to cobble together different parcels. One on the corner right by the annex, one over on Chapala and Figueroa or something. There was a building that also wasn't adequate and had to have been torn down and rebuilt and so forth. So the reality, there's what would be nice and perfect, and then there's what is reality. And the reality of this situation, it seems to me, if history is any indicator, is that the dream of a new police public safety facility is probably 20 years away still. And so, do we ask them to continue in these circumstances, under these conditions, in the building that they have for the infinite, the undetermined future? I don't think that's fair. It's already been a long time. We've had 2 generations of police officers come and go through that building, at least, under these conditions with inadequate space and air and facilities and everything else. $8 million is a lot of money. It is a holding pattern, but I submit that it's not a 5-year waiting period. I submit it's a 15-year waiting period. And if we can get out there with a bond measure and really push it, that still isn't going to be feasible or viable politically for another 5 years based on the disastrous economy that we have going forward into at least the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years. People aren't going to want to assess themselves again. They just did several times. So let's put all the cards on the table. Let's put all the practicalities of what's going on the table and really make an assessment of where our priorities are and what we're going to do. I would have loved to have had a new building a dozen years ago, 15 years ago. Ain't going to happen. It just is not going to happen. There it is. So that's my fundamental, that's where I'm coming from when I am as tenacious about getting these fixes and getting these repairs to the best of our ability as soon as we can, because I just don't have any confidence in the world, and all the good intentions aren't going to make that change. So that's my base.
I pretty much agree with that comment, and the reason I think is that if we had been in a position to look for a new building or build a new building, maybe 8 years ago, 6 years ago, and had been able to strike at that time, then I think the differences here between spending $8 million, which might not be a totally perfect project, versus building a new project, that would be more reasonable. But at this point, it seems to me that the financial picture is as cloudy as I've seen it in my adult lifetime, and I don't see it getting better as time goes on. I mean, every day we learn about more severe issues. So I don't think the overall picture is looking good, and the ability to sell bonds doesn't look particularly good to me. And anyway, I don't know that we have to cross that bridge right now. But would anybody like to try a motion, or do you have enough instructions?
I think what I'm hearing is that at least there's two of you who want to go forward with the $8 million project, and I think our recommendation is we'll go forward with the plans, and then when we bring the RDA budget back to you in a couple of weeks, then you can look at that, put it in the context, and then you also may want to make recommendations to the full council on going forward with it at that point, but also then you may want to give recommendations on the other projects in there that you want to reprioritize.
That sounds right to me.
I will make that a motion, what he said.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Do we need further clarification from anyone? If not, then all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. I believe that's all we have on our agenda today, so we're going to adjourn the meeting.